So welcome to Don't Be a Stereotype, Rapid Prototype. I know that's probably a weird sounding title for a session, but hopefully it makes sense to you guys when it's all done. My name is Ed Charbeneau. I'm a software developer advocate for Telerik. We make awesome UI controls and cloud platforms and developer tooling. So if you get a chance, stop by our website, check that stuff out. I'm an author of many things, so I'm working on an ASP.NET Core book right now, and I write for the Telerik Developer Network and some other publications. I also have a podcast called Eat, Sleep, Code. If you get a chance, look that up and check it out. And if you want to chat with me, just hit me up on Twitter. I'm frequently on there. So this used to be me, and this is a fun cartoon. I love this one. This is by XKCD. And basically, this guy's saying, can you please pass the salt? And being of that developer mentality, he's busy building an arbitrary system for passing any type of condiment when all the other person needed was salt. And this was me like in meetings, right? So the stakeholders would be laying out the plans for the application, and in the meantime, I'd be building things in my head, and I'd be designing tables and forms and whatnot before they even finished outlining what exactly it was they wanted. And a lot of the problem was because we had like this siloed approach, and I had my goals and vision of what the application was going to do, and the customer had their goals and visions of what the application was going to do. And the further we got through the project, the more it started to converge a little bit. Our visions kind of got a little bit closer together, but we always missed out on something really important in that diagram there, and that's what the customers actually needed. So we had this stereotypical view of what our users were, both myself and the people who were setting the goals, the stakeholders and the customers. So what is a stereotype anyway? A good definition of it here is an oversimplified image of a person or thing. So try to keep that in mind, because we do a lot of stereotyping when we talk about users, other developers, and we'll get a good idea of this as we go along. So here's some really fun examples of what happens when you're not doing any type of user experience testing with your applications. This is a great one. It says, my little sister's password for the Disney website is Mickey, Minnie, Goofy, and Pluto. And when I asked her why, she said, well, use 4 characters. So people's idea of what something may be completely different than another person's perspective. And we find out these things really the hard way. Your users definitely don't always see things the same way that you do. And if you're not researching things, you can make some pretty big mistakes. Like this guy, he was mailing his mail in the dog waste box because it looks an awful lot like the post box. Okay. And communicating is hard, and it all comes down to the lack of communication, really. If you're not seeing through your customer's eyes or your user's eyes, then you can't really know exactly what their interpretation of what's going on means. And when you don't do things correctly, you can end up looking like a real jerk. So, I don't know who comes up with these types of sign systems here, but it's very much a fail. And I've worked on projects where we've actually had like flow charts for people to actually navigate the application and do things. And if you have a flow chart to actually use your application, you have failed in a major way. And one of the things that we really were missing out on is a common place to communicate. We needed a prototype. So what is rapid prototyping? Well, every industry has a form of this. And it's about quickly producing a working model. And without a working model, you can't really communicate on something and have the same perspective on something, and you can't anticipate how people are going to use things. So when we use a tool like this, who are the people that we're communicating with? And actually, it's everybody. Everybody on our team, we're communicating with designers, developers, customers, testers, users, you name it. So we're all working on a single product, and we're all trying to get to a single goal, and we need a common ground for collaboration. So remember the siloed approach that I had at the beginning? This is more of what we needed, rather than two teams with two different ideas going at it and deciding on a third set of people on how they were going to use something. And this is a really good example of how that process would look. This is a great article by Ben Callahan. He works for a company called Sparkbox, actually in Dayton, Ohio. And he wrote a great summary on how to use this type of a process and iterate quickly and involve all parts of application development. So who am I in this process? This guy up here that's talking to you guys is a web developer and a designer. So I was blessed with some skills from my mom and dad's different types of thinking. My mom is an artist, and my dad's kind of the engineering type. So I actually fell into a bucket where I sit in the middle, and I do both web design and development. And oddly enough, I don't associate myself with either one of these folks up here. I don't have the hipster T-shirt. I don't use a Mac, but then again, I'm not the cargo pants type. So here we have a stereotype of how designers and developers might see each other. And this all came up because I was actually working on a project where I had done some design work for a client, and that client didn't have any questions about the design. Her question was, why do you have a Dell and not a MacBook? And I thought that was a little odd. I was looking for some valuable feedback on the actual project, not what type of computer I use, because it doesn't really matter what type of equipment I use. I'm a software developer or a designer, and the product that I'm building is not a result of the tools that I use, but the skills that I use to build those. So we don't aspire to fit a stereotype. We don't use a tool just because we think that tool is going to do a better job than another tool. We need to think outside of our tools. And it kind of boils down to what do we use? And if you're in one camp or another, you have to use exactly these tools, right? Well, no, we don't. What I ended up doing is building my own prototyping toolbox to solve these problems. And I picked the tools that I thought were important to me, not what other people were thinking should be important to me. Some of those things I built myself, and then some of those things I pulled in from the outside, like Foundation. Kendo UI is a product of Teller, by the way. I use GitHub. I use some Microsoft technologies like Visual Studio. And then I wrote my own plugin that is available for ASP.NET MVC. And it's also available for just straight HTML development as well in JavaScript. And that's called Inlinelpsum. And I'll show you some demos of that in a little bit. So why did I do this? I used to use traditional wireframes, pen and paper. I use Balsamiq. And those are all great tools, and I wouldn't suggest anybody abandon those things if they're already using them. They're really great to get started. But they do break down at some point. And the reason for that is because responsive web design came around. And we don't know anymore what type of device we're going to be interacting with on the next day. There's always some new watch or IoT thing that's got a browser built into it. So we can't really anticipate what the device is that's going to be viewing our web application or our website. And that's really the static pitfall of the pitfall of static wireframing, is you can't take a sheet of paper and really manipulate it. You can surely turn it and crunch it up and stuff, but the design on it doesn't actually do anything. We don't know what it's going to look like on a phone and a tablet And if we rotate the paper, the design doesn't follow along. And then we have inputs that don't exist when you're just holding a sheet of paper. There's a lot of new speech recognition and other inputs that have come along in the last couple of years. So what I started doing is using these tools to write the wireframes directly in the browser or directly in HTML and view them in the browser versus just doing them on a sheet of paper or in Balsamiq or one of those other tools. And there's a really good article that you can find that I've referenced here. This is by the folks at Zerb. They're the ones that make Foundation, which is a really great CSS framework, something I'll have a couple demos of today. And the idea behind it is that you're putting the prototype in its native environment. So you're giving somebody, whether it's your user or your customer or your designer or your developer, the native platform to view the application on. So you can hand them a device where they can actually interact with the wireframe versus handing them a sheet of paper or some other device or some other material that's not the actual deployed application. And this gives them a better perspective of what that application will turn out to be. So let's dig into the tools a little bit, and I'll explain how this works. One of my favorite tools to work with is Foundation. It's a really good responsive web framework. It's actually built to do rapid prototyping, which is a little bit of a different approach than Bootstrap. Bootstrap originally was heavily themed, and up until 3.0, they actually dropped most of the themes. And it's a good prototyping tool as well, and I'll actually include it in several of the demos today. I also use Chrome Developer Tools. This is really handy for iterating through prototypes and making changes on the fly. I'll show you some demos where we actually drag and drop elements and change styles and colors and things right in the browser. And this is stuff that you can actually pull in your customers and your users and actually do this stuff with them. And it really works well to have several people in the room and actually manipulate the design and talk through the process with them rather than go back to your desk and make changes and then try to have them discover what those changes are later. And then the next tool I'll talk about is called Inlinelpsum.js, or if you're using ASP.NET MVC, it's called prototyping. And this is a tool that I created to help fill out pages with placeholder content. So this generates lorem ipsum text, and it injects this lorem ipsum text in the UI elements at runtime. So it frees you up to work on your layout without having all that placeholder stuff sitting in your source code. And then I'll show you some little tricks and tips with Git that can help you iterate through designs. And there's some really interesting stuff that you can pull off with that. So let's look at some actual demos and see how this stuff works. So the demos you'll see me do today are actually written in ASP.NET MVC 5. But almost everything I'm showing you here today, except for maybe one demo, you can do in just standard HTML and JavaScript. And it doesn't really require a backend. It's pretty agnostic. So I have this sample application up and running, and I'm going to go over to example 1 here, and you'll notice it's a blank page. So there's nothing on this page. And what I want to demo first is the Inlinelpsum tool, or the prototyping tool that I created. Now this tool has the same syntax whether you're using JavaScript or you're using ASP.NET MVC. I designed it that way. I really liked the way that the syntax came out and the API works in .NET, so I actually mimicked that in the JavaScript version as well. So let's go ahead and kick this off with a little placeholder text. And what I want to do is I'm going to type @HTML, which is going to give us a Razor helper. If you're not familiar with Razor helpers, this is just a function that returns HTML. So when I say @HTML, I know I'm going to get some HTML back. And then next, I'm going to call the Ipsum API. And this is going to set off a chain. So I can say, I would like a paragraph tag with some placeholder text inside. I'm going to save this. And I'm going to go back and refresh the page. And you'll notice now I have some placeholder text on the page. So that's fairly handy. And I'm accidentally opening consoles for you. All right, so let's do something a little different. Let's go do an H1 tag. And you'll notice this API is chainable. So if I do H1 and then I do an H2, and then I do a paragraph, and let me save that, and refresh this page, and you'll see I'm building out some placeholder content. And this is chainable indefinitely. I just can keep going and going and going, and I can do all kinds of stuff in here. I can do some unordered lists. I can do ordered lists. And I can also specify parameters, like how many items in the list I want. Do I want those list items to show up as links, yes or no? And this helps me just build out HTML very quickly, just so I can hold the space on the page and work through different layouts. Because clients are really good at getting you content and data for your prototype applications. Another thing that it can do is it calls out to a web service called PlaceHoldIt. You may be familiar with that. What it does is it generates some placeholder images for you. So I can say @HTML placehold and just give it a width and a height and save that. And when I refresh, it'll come back with an image of that definition. So this can help if you have lists where you have, avatars of people, or you want to put a placeholder in for maybe a blog post or some other type of imagery in your application. Because once again, clients are so great at supplying that stuff for you up front. So next demo I'm going to do, this is the only one that's really a demo that only works in ASP.NET. This first part of it is an API that's on the .NET version that doesn't exist in the JavaScript. And that one is, I can call @HTML table, and it will give me a table of some random data. And then the next one relies on an ASP.NET model, or a C# class, rather. And you can see I have a class of person here, first name, last name, title, email. And I have another handy tool that's just new in development. And there's some guys called the ASP.NET Monsters that came up with this. And it's a really cool little tool. I want to show you how that works. And I'm going to use a Tellerk product as well in here called Kendo UI. So what I want to do is generate a grid, and I want to use that model that I just showed you that has first name, last name, and email in it. And I'll retype this here. I'm going to say a list of, and pass it the person object. And this tool is going to look at that object and go, oh, you want a first name and an email. I know what those types are. And it's going to generate data with those types. And it's going to put it in a Kendo UI grid for me. So you can see I have some almost realistic data here. I have real names, first name, last name, some real email addresses. And that's all just generated on the fly. And it knows how to do that by looking at the model and what we name the properties on the model. So that can be helpful to get things going really fast. So the next couple demos here, I'm going to show you how Bootstrap is a real big help in creating prototypes. So this just shows a simple content layout. If you're not familiar with Bootstrap, Bootstrap breaks down the page into a set of grid rows and columns. And that set of grid rows and columns is responsive, so we can do a lot of things with Bootstrap as far as laying out pages. And here's the source code for that page. So you can see I have a row at the top, and this has my header. And then I have a second row, and you'll notice some classes that have been applied to this. And we have columns extra small 12 and column large 3. So what this is going to do is when we have a small device, this page, the elements are going to take up the entire width of the page. When we have a large device, like a desktop application, then we're going to have a layout that has an element that's 3 units of measurement across, and then another element that's 9 units of measurement across. And so that's what you see there. And I'm using that placeholder plugin to generate that content. So this kind of shows how you can use Bootstrap and create the layouts for your page, and you have the placeholders that are in there, but they're not in your source code, and they're not affecting your development cycle. You don't have to mentally parse through all of that placeholder text while you're working on your page layouts. Now, I said when we have a small device, those items would take up the entire width of the page. So you can see when we go down to a smaller window how those items stack up. And then in Chrome Developer Tools, there's actually a little bit of help that we can get. If you press F12, there's actually a little button over here that we can click, and we'll get a little device emulator. And we can actually go in and we can pick different types of phones that we want to emulate. So we could see, what does this look like on an iPhone 6? And you can see that refreshes. And we can see how the layout's affected by mobile devices. So this is a really handy development tool, and this is where the strength of doing wireframes really shines versus having a paper mock-up. This is the actual functioning working model of what the application will do with a mobile device and a desktop device. And we can even rotate these devices. And there, you can simulate clicking on menus and whatnot. So this next demo shows more of the same, but we have an image on this one. So I wanted to show here how we can control how images respond in an application and how layouts can respond in an application. So in this one, we're not stacking like we were before, so I've left out that column extra small. And I'm keeping the same aspect ratio no matter what screen size we're at, and you can see how the image reacts there. So if I go to the source code for that one, you can see we have a special HTML attribute on it. And this one's called image responsive. This is part of Bootstrap. Foundation actually does this by default. And if I remove that and refresh this page, you'll notice the image kind of just blows out. And it doesn't shrink and grow with the width of the page. So these tools help you find out how things like images and video are going to interact with your application and allow you to prepare for that before you actually start writing the real-world application. And then this demo here I wanted to show what it'd be like to have a navigation element and what type of scenarios you might run into in a responsive environment. I'm going to shrink this down. You'll notice the navigation on the left side actually changed into like a drop-down box. So the elements that were in the navigation are now rolled up into this drop-down. And this is one approach to changing the navigation so it fits on the page better. But this isn't the best approach for handling your navigation, but it is a good stepping stone to working through a prototype and getting to something that's better. So this is just using a show and hide class with Bootstrap. And how this works is there's a CSS selector that's called hidden on large and another one that's called visible on large. And I'm just swapping those two UI elements out. And I'm allowing for some more real estate by using a drop-down list versus using a menu. Now, this isn't best practice, so this isn't something you want in your final app. But like I said, it's a stepping stone to get you there. It gets you over the hurdle, and it gets you into the next iteration. And what you would want in a final application scenario is something that adapts like this menu that we have at the top. And this is also a Bootstrap feature. So this menu you can see shrinks and grows as the page changes size. That's more of an ideal scenario. And sometimes you might find that you need more custom UI elements to do these sorts of things. But at least you're iterating on something and communicating with your users on what their needs are. Now, speaking of iterating with users, this is a really nice feature of modern web development tools like Chrome. I believe you can do this in Edge now as well. And this is something you can actually sit down with a client that you're working with or a customer you're working with. And you can see like we've got a page layout here, and we're using some navigation on the left and some text on the right. And we have some images in here. And when we go to a mobile situation, these things might not quite look right. And what if we wanted to change some of these things around, but we didn't want to go back and have to actually like edit the code and recompile and publish to the server? We can actually go right into our development tools here. And if somebody wanted to know if this navigation that's on the left would maybe serve us better on the right, we can actually dive down into the source code here. And since we're using a grid system like Bootstrap, what we can do in Chrome is we can actually just come over to, I'll make this a little bit bigger here. We can actually come over to this navigation column, and we can highlight it, drag it, and move it beneath the other column that we have. And when I let this go, there we go, now it's dragging. When I let this go, you see they actually swap positions on the fly. So we can actually sit down with a customer or a user and come up with different scenarios where these things might work better for them because we can actually edit stuff live in the browser. We can drag and drop. We can actually change the dimensions of these layouts while we're in this mode. And you might think this might freak out some of your users. They actually kind of get a kick out of some of this stuff, to be honest. They like being part of the development process and seeing some of the magic behind the curtain, so to speak. So we can actually come in here and make changes to these as well. So right now I have an element that's taking up 50% of the layout, and it's a class of extra small 6, which means it's taking up half of the 12 columns available. I can actually come in here and change this to an 8. And I can come over to the other one. And you notice it's going to get a little funky at first. But I can come back over to this one and change this to a 4. And you can see we've changed the aspect ratio of those two pieces of layout right in the browser on the fly. And I've used this process to build quite a few applications. And I've sat down with users and stakeholders, and we've actually been able to hash out a lot of problems before we actually move on to the final product. And you might be thinking this kind of looks like a web site more than an application. This stuff actually works really well for web apps. So we actually have a demonstration app as well. And this is kind of like a conference application you might see where you want to reserve a seat at a conference. And you can see we have what would be maybe speaker abstracts and details on the right, and then we could pick different tracks and maybe days for the sessions on the left. And this works completely mobile as well. And what's nice about it is we can actually click through these prototypes. So you can see I can go back, I can click on session details, and it pulls up session detail. I can reserve my seat and get a confirmation dialog and walk through the process of using the application so I can find things that the user might trip up on and might not be so user-friendly to them. So one of the things that I did for the company I work for, Telleric, is we have a product called UI for ASP.NET MVC. And this product is essentially a wrapper for another product we have called Kendo UI. And it's a product that we use to build responsive web UIs. And I wanted to write a application that gives you a quick start guide. And you go onto our site, you download a trial of our software, and then you walk through this prototyping process with the guide. So when you download the application starter kit, this is what you're presented with. So you have this team efficiency dashboard, and it has just placeholder elements in it. And as you walk through the application, you actually learn how to use our tools and replace these placeholder elements with our user controls. And this is what the final product looks like when you're finished. And this is also a responsive web app. So if I shrink this down into like a tablet mode, you can see that the menu collapses on the side, and we get a nice fly out, and we can walk through the different people, and it changes over on the right-hand side. And this is what you would learn to build. You'd learn our calendar controls and our grid controls and our charting. But you start off with this nice blank slate here. And this is, once again, like you could test out things like navigation. And this is something that I built in the prototype, and I worked on some UI stuff for. So that's an example of this going from start to finish, like from prototype to actual finished product. This next demo I talked about using Git as a prototyping tool. And I'll actually pull that slide up a little bit here, because there's a little more to it than just showing off the demo. I'll kind of give you a visual of what's going on here. So I have this little visual. Now, if you're a designer, you know this might not be something that you're yourself interested in, but you can understand how the developers that you're working with might be able to tackle a problem like iterating through prototypes. So what we do here is we have a main branch, and that has a certain layout in it, and then we're going to create some separate branches, and those might have something like left-hand navigation and right-hand navigation. And then we can test those two branches independently with some users and make a decision on which one is better, and then merge in the ones that worked well, delete the ones that didn't matter, and then keep repeating this process until we have a usable product. So I want to show you an actual demo of that in action. So I know this isn't the best design ever. It wasn't meant to be. These are just color-coded so you can see where the different items in the layout actually come up. And I'm going to switch this over to a smaller screen size so you can see how this layout is rendered in the UI. So you can see here the navigation that I had. I'll stretch this back out. You see the orange navigation goes up to the top. The purple navigation kind of falls in the middle. And then we have the blue and the green, the main content and the aside content layout in this manner. So I'm going to go over to a tool called Get from Windows. There's a bunch of these out there. Like Get Kraken is a brand new one that's really cool you might want to check out. Visual Studio actually has tooling built in now. But in this one, I have created several branches. So I have 4 different mobile layouts I'm going to test. And my web server is running. This is actually a live web application right now. And I'm just going to go ahead and switch over to mobile layout B. I'm going to go back to Chrome and just refresh the page. I'm not doing any compilation. I'm not doing anything crazy. There's no server-side interactivity here, so I can just refresh it. It's just HTML and JavaScript, and it's going to change that layout right there for me. So you can see I've kind of maintained an aspect ratio here that still doesn't look like what I want to keep. So I can go back and choose another alternate layout I've created. And just as easy as changing those branches and going back to my browser and refreshing, I can see what that layout looks like. And I have one more. I'll just go ahead and do that one as well. This one had a little bit of extra JavaScript in it. And when I refresh this one, I've got a floating menu that sticks with me on the bottom of the screen. So I can decide which one of those is the best for the user, or let the user help me decide, rather, which one of those is best for them to use. And then I can just merge that branch back into the main master branch, and then delete the ones that we didn't use, and move on from there. So there's how a tool that's not associated with prototyping, it's not really associated with much more than revision control, can actually be used to facilitate iterating through wireframes. So that about wraps up all the demos that I have for you. I'd be happy to take questions if anybody has questions. Anybody? Yeah, way in the back. Might have to be loud. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, sorry. So the question is, like, when you go to interview for a UX job, they want, like, experience with Axure or one of those prototyping tools? Yeah, I've given this talk for quite a while, and I get different types of people that attend. I get designers and UX people and developers. And I guess to answer your question the best, if they're looking for somebody that's an expert in Axure, then they may be just looking for exactly that. What you might want to do is position yourself as somebody that wants to bridge the gap between different teams and kind of present yourself as that person. It's up to them to decide whether they want that Axure like guru, or they want somebody that wants to work on prototyping and bring their design and UX and code teams together. Anybody else? Yeah.
Was it the Ipsum tool that generated data based on the model?
No, that one's actually called GenFu, and that's something that's really new, and I'm helping contribute to it. Yes, it's open source. It's literally GENFU, GenFu. That one's, it sounds funny when you say it out loud. That one's actually something that's pretty new. They originally started writing it for .NET Core, so it's that new. I thought it was really cool, and I have an lorem ipsum generator that I use on the back end of my tool, and I'm actually going to switch it out and make the dependency on GenFu, so you can intermix those and just download one. Just download my prototyping tool. It'll bring theirs in as well, and you can go back and forth. You can go from just straight HTML with lorem ipsum to using your model and then deleting that stuff out and going to your real application when you're done. So it'll facilitate you from beginning to end of the process. So it's something I just started working on as well, because I just found them about 2 weeks ago. Anybody else? Yeah, way in the back. Yeah, so that was kind of what the gentleman next to you was asking. So if you guys didn't hear it, she was asking, is there a tool that's more designer-friendly than code-friendly or more robust than Balsamic? And that would be something like Axure, which it will build clickable prototypes that you can walk through. I'm not so familiar with Axure. I don't know if they actually can produce code that the developers can use. There's some tools that are headed in that direction. I haven't used those. This has worked well for me, so I haven't really looked that deeply into them. But that would be your answer. Axure is something of that nature. Anybody else?